Oh, IG Live is started. Alright. This is another week of the Word. IG Live. The word of this week, it's a Hawaiian word. It's cool. We're keeping with our theme of branching out from Eurocentric words. Branching out. We're gonna keep European words too, because we speak a lot of European stuff, but we're branching out. We're showing the whole tapestry of important words for us to know. And so this word is Hawaiian, and it is mo'olelo. Yeah, it's a fun word to say. I'm not even going to lie. Mo'olelo. You have to, your mouth, you have to contort it in ways that you normally don't need to when you speak English. So I actually enjoy saying this. I spent some time practicing, so I'm not as concerned about saying it wrong as I was last week. And then I found out that last week I'd been saying the word right the entire time. And so I had all this anxiety about saying the word right or wrong, but I was doing it right the whole time anyway. So this word is mo'olelo, and it's Hawaiian, and it means history, story, legend, myth, and I think it's a very, very important word for us to think about in society today, and for a lot of reasons. I think this is a word that we should be more aware of. And the reason for this word being important, especially today, is due to its foundation on oral storytelling. And I know in the African American community, we have our own focus on spoken word and telling stories via the spoken word. But that's in America really kind of considered a niche black thing, and I think culturally we don't really celebrate or understand the importance of spoken word and oral storytelling. And that, when you sit down and think about it, is just very strange, because most of human existence has been based around telling stories orally. People would gather around a campfire or some communal gathering, dinner, breakfast, whatever, tell the stories of their people. And these stories would be historical facts, stuff that happened 2 weeks ago, stuff that happened a year ago, all that kind of stuff. But there would also be the myths and the legends of their ancestors generation ago. There'd be all these origin stories, and talking about spirits and the connections to the earth, and all these things that you can't prove factually, but are that are the social fabric, the communal fabric of a people. And all of that would be interwoven in the oral tradition of telling the story of a people. And so with mo'olelo, you hear that the word translates as story, myth, legend, history. And in a Western perspective, that can seem contradictory, because we kind of view history as just documented facts, written on a piece of paper that you can go and get a book and look at, and that'll be it. But that's due to a reliance on the written word. And mythologies will be their own section. If you go to the library or something, they'll be mythologies will be over here and history section will be over there, and they're two completely different things. But when you're more reliant on telling these stories orally, they come together, and these facts and the facts and these myths get interwoven, and those become the story of a people. And it's something that has been quite lost in our society today, this story of this oral tradition, and how it blends myth and facts and history. And it's just really, really significant to think about that. And also, a lot of the myths that we know in the West, we know them because they've been written down. If you think of just like the Brothers Grimm stories, all of those were like mythologies that people in Europe and Germany had been telling people for generations orally through social gatherings, and up until, and this is interesting. So the Brothers Grimm, they're two German brothers that were academics. They also created the first German dictionary, and that was in the 1800s. So like these guys, you think of the Brothers Grimm, they told these stories. They actually made the first German dictionary. So like even culturally, the importance of myths and just language are really interwoven. But apart from that, like side note, we know these myths because they were documented and written down, and now we think of them as two different things. But like myths in like a Germanic sense, like the Brothers Grimm's, were stories that people told people to educate and mature people through life. Like there's a whole greater meaning behind Snow White and people going into the forest and this, that, and the other, and the symbolism of the colors. There's a whole bunch of stuff. And so like these stories that would be told orally, these myths, whether they're happening in Europe or in Africa or Asia or the Americas, all blend with history, and those become the stories of a people. And the fact that we don't have a word in English that harmonizes these two ideas to articulate their importance is really significant. So Mo'olelo helps clarify the importance of these being interwoven. And so in this week's The Word, when I wrote about the absence of a word like Mo'olelo in America, I thought about it through ethnocide, where, if you're looking at the transatlantic slave trade and there's an ethnocidal campaign, African people had all sorts of oral traditions, all sorts of the spirit of their people. Oh, here's another thing that's key, is if these stories are being preserved orally, there is an obligation of the storyteller and the community to be kind of like the wise holder of truth. Like these stories can't get corrupted. You can't just say, I wrote them down in a book and go look at them. That's all you need. It's, the person has an obligation to tell the stories over and over and over again and make sure that they're true every single time, so that when they pass the story on to somebody else, the story remains true. And so, like, it's really fascinating to think about that as a person, you kind of would have a job of being like the holder of truth for a community, like the bearer of it. And it was your responsibility to tell the history and the myths and not let those get corrupted or sullied. And so these weren't things that you necessarily would want to package or sell or modify for an audience. There's something that you kind of keep inside of you, that you keep it to be true, with the goal of sharing it to someone and allowing that truth to live in another person, and that truth be the truth of like a whole community. And so, like, when you think about like the gravity of that, now you look at ethnocide. Now you look at, the transatlantic slave trade, and Europeans wanted to forcefully extract the culture from African people to create a chattel slavery system. And so destroying the storyteller, destroying the stories, destroying the capacity for people to like speak their truth. Even if they could speak their truth, nobody would understand it or nobody would care about it. Is like a foundational component of ethnocide. And clearly that also happened to indigenous people throughout the Americas. Hawaiian people are indigenous people in the Americas. And so this devaluing of oral storytelling and the holders of truth is a key part of ethnocidal division. And as an African American, like a lot of here's a not funny example, but like right now we're talking a lot about George Floyd, and and Ahmaud Arbery and Breonna Taylor, all sorts of people that are the victims of Black Lives Matter movement. And I remember, like, I was talking to a white friend of mine when all the George Floyd stuff happened, and he was telling me, like, he just doesn't know why, but, like, this one was, like, the thing that really, like, shattered his perspective or made him change something. And it's like, he was kind of curious as to, like, why I thought that this was the moment, because he recognized in other white people that this was the moment too. And I told him, like, I could speculate why it was, but you can't really know. But what I do know is that, like, black people have been saying that stuff like this happens all the time. And we've been telling this story generationally. Like, there's not been a story from one black person to the next generation that doesn't incorporate some sort of white inflicted terror that we've either felt or we've had to, like, avoid for our lives. Like, that's just foundational. But that oral tradition is not an oral tradition that America has any desire to legitimize or make it seem even remotely real. And so, like, within ethnocide, the oral tradition of people's experiences and their history don't matter. Especially the people of the oppressed, those don't matter. But also the people that are doing the oppressing doesn't matter for them either, because they're not going to tell those stories. They're going to tell propagated stories. That's going to make their atrocities appear banal or benevolent. And then we'll have these really, like, euphoric, uplifting stories that only talks about, the good things that these oppressive enterprises have done. And so when you look at that framework, you can see why oral storytelling just wouldn't have a place in our society, and there wouldn't be a word that articulates it, and there wouldn't be the understanding that myths and history and legends all can be interwoven as, like, the fabric of a people. And that's just something that I think is quite significant to think about, especially since the 4th of July was yesterday, and we are spending a lot of time now rethinking what an appropriate American narrative can and should be, because I think we're realizing that the narrative we've had has one that is completely excluded and erased the oral traditions of the lived experiences of people of color, and that the story that white people have told is one that omits a lot of really pertinent information. And so yeah. So that's my intro for this word. If any of you guys have questions or thoughts about Mo'olelo and man, sky just opened up, about the word or oral traditions, or how you think it all works within ethnocide, please ask away. But this is the word of this week. We're this month, because we're doing this Sama Sama project, we're focusing a lot on Asian words this week, which I think is really, really cool. It's actually, I guess, it would be fair to say, like, it gets me a smidgen out of my comfort zone, but which is something that I actually look forward to doing, because it's not, pronouncing words that you're not used to saying can seem intimidating, and also, like, it's really funny, like, your mouth gets, like, a weird exercise, where, like, you're just not used to, like, saying words in that way, saying sounds like that. And so it's kind of funny. You kind of have to, like, train your mouth. Like, you gotta do, like, vocal exercises or something. It's funny. Like, this is another tangent. But, like, whenever I go to France, I'd always look at people's mouths, and you'd see, especially, like, with women, they'd have, like, a muscle right there because they're doing this all the time. And it's like, man, English people never have those. But all the French people have those. They always have, like, muscles right here because their mouth has to, like, make a shape that's, like, specific to French, that you just don't need to make your mouth in that shape in other languages. But anyways, that's Mo'olelo. Also, this week we have 2 really cool events. One of them is our Sama SCL Diaspora People's Month event on Wednesday at 7 o'clock. All of you guys should come. It's a lot of fun. We have 3 artists, and we have a conversation about the mixture of art and philosophy. And so it's free. Links on Eventbrite. And then on Friday, this is kind of cool. I've been invited to speak on a panel at the American Bar Association about redlining in the U.S. and, you know, racial division, systemic oppression. And that is on Friday at 1 p.m. And we've shared that on our social media. And so there's links. But this is a pretty cool one because once people were more comfortable with me talking about ethnocide, now people want me to go and talk about it, which, you know, 3 months ago, there would be no way somebody would want me to be like one of the key panelists at the American Bar Association, that like the president of the American Bar Association can be at the event. And now that's just what's happening on Friday. And so yeah, I think I'm going to get a haircut prior to that, by the way. But yeah, if Jackie, Luna, Cassandra, if any of you guys have any questions about Molelo, please put them in the question. By the way, I think the art for this one was really cool looking. I really liked it. I think the art for all of them were good, but this one was just, I didn't even see this one. It just came out and I was like, oh wow, that's great. But yeah, so Mololelo, it is a good word because it reminds us the importance of keeping oral traditions alive. Boom. I wish the media or history books could see the importance of Mololelo and uplift more stories of people of color. No, I totally think so too. Let's see. All right, Luna, boom. How do you think oral tradition is changing in the pandemic and on social media? Oh, wow, that's a good question. So let's see. I think, So I'd say, firstly, with, I think it's harder to silence the voices of communities of color right now. I think, let's see. So I was talking to someone a little while ago comparing the present to the civil rights era. Because that's always the comparison everyone likes to say. It's like, oh, this is like the 60s and blah, blah, blah. And I remember back when I do the comparison, like back in the 60s, like all the white people that were supporting African Americans were always there. Like they didn't actually know the black people. Like some of them did, but there'd be like a moral calling. Like, this is not right. I need to leave where I live in New York or wherever and go to the South. Or if I'm going to do something, I'm going to do like a sit-in or something in New York where I live. But they didn't actually know the people. They didn't know the stories of these people. They just saw something on television that made it easy for them to recognize that such and such was wrong. And that's not the case today. I think that there are a lot of people, whether you're black, white, Asian, Latino, indigenous, that we are friends with so many different types of people. And so when someone sees George Floyd get murdered, they don't just think that's morally wrong. They see that and they go, that could be my black friend. That could be this person I work with. And I think that's what's changing it. Where like the story that a lot of people, communities of color have been saying, those stories now exist in the minds and hearts of a lot of people who aren't part of that community. And so due to that, those stories become part of the narrative. And it's not people connecting on a theoretical level, it's more of a communal level. And so I think now, and maybe also like COVID is making people realize that they miss their friends, and that you actually have to exert effort to talk to people. I think it's really easy if you have a job. It's like you wake up, you go to this place, you see the same people, and then, it's just a routine, and your friends are kind of like proximity people. But now, like, you don't have that proximity. So you have to make effort to hang out with people. And so maybe that's making people value their friendships just a tad bit more because you have to exert effort to do it. But also, I do think if you incorporate Donald Trump into the mix, like the fact that he just literally says nothingness all the time makes people yearn for something with meaning just a tad bit more. And so it's a convergence of a lot. Social media, I think social media does have an impact because people are on it all the time and they're talking and they're sharing stuff. But like social media, at the same time, if you like, they do all the algorithms. The same communities of people, they don't mix. Like all the Trump people, their social media feed is one thing. If you're progressive or whatever, it's the same thing. And so, if like the progressive space is a bit more open to listening to the stories of African Americans and indigenous people and other communities of color now than they were like 5 months ago, I think maybe social media contributes and builds on this like more human connection that we have now. But I think the fact that the stories that have been told orally from the communities of color are being more openly received now is the key thing. And just like, one of my white friends, he just said for some reason this one hit him harder, George Floyd hit him harder than everybody else. The fact that African Americans were saying essentially the same thing for centuries, can't begrudge the person for not seeing it. He lives in a culture that encourages people not to see it. But this tipped it. And now those stories that were said orally, true, yes, progressives do love podcasts too. And I can, we at SCL have just started a couple podcasts too. So please listen to those. It's SCL Radio on our website. But yeah, progressives do love podcasts. And I think we definitely love, man, there's so many different types of podcasts. It's such a broad question because, so yeah, I do think podcasts are bringing oral tradition back, 100%. I guess the key thing about the story is not that you're telling a story, but like the truth that is in the story. So yeah, I definitely think people like podcasts a lot. But now the main thing is to make sure that the podcast have like an equitable narrative. Like, and that's not saying that they aren't, they weren't equitable before, but just to go like the American Bar Association thing, like they weren't talking about race nearly as much as they are. Right now they're talking about race way more than they were months and months ago. And that's not to say that they had like a policy or an idea of not wanting to talk about race. It just wasn't something that these were the oral stories they needed to tell. And so podcasts are good. Don't get me wrong. The key thing now is making sure that the podcasts and the stories that are being told are stories that ensure that the narrative, the oral traditions of all these groups who, within this ethnocidal society, their culture has been here to be erased. It's not being erased, and it's part of our collective cultural narrative. And so podcasts are a good tool, but it's the key thing is the stories that are being told, not necessarily like the platform or the technology. It's the philosophy that precedes the technology that makes the difference. But good question. I hope I answered that. Now I realize I did give a pretty long answer to that question. So I hope it was okay. Yes, and 100% more voices of color, less textbooks from the 80s. Big time. And I'm from the South. The textbooks from the South, there's not an ambiguity about this. They were just like made by like Confederate sympathizers. Like, we're just in the South, we're just indoctrinated with propaganda. Okay, so you also talked about storytellers keeping the truth alive. Could you speak to how having a president that does the complete opposite damages society? Yeah, I can talk about that for days. So here's the key. So the key thing is Donald Trump never speaks the truth. But the thing that frustrates people right now, so there's two types of frustrations from it. It's that when you see someone not speak the truth and just lie all the time, that's quite frustrating. No one wants to talk to someone where they know that they're just going to lie to them. But when he's the president, you literally have to talk to him all the time. And you would like for there to be some sort of repercussion to lying. And the fact that there don't ever seem to be any repercussions to him lying all the time is very, very frustrating. Now, the thing that takes it to like another level is that a lot of the lies that Donald Trump says now are things that America thought were true 30 years ago. His dislike for CNN and all that kind of stuff, that's just pettiness. But the stuff that he says regarding Confederate monuments, Second Amendment, stuff regarding like the LGBTQ community, towards African Americans, towards women, toward it's the stance for on like Roe v. Wade, all of this stuff. A lot of the things that he says right now that we are like, these are just crazy, like misogynistic, xenophobic, racist lies, are things that America has built its society around believing are true. And that's partially why we are in this really pivotal moment right now, where we're sick of a person in the White House that just lies all the time, and you know that when you talk to him, you're going to get absolutely nothing of benefit or comfort in the slightest. He's not going to solve any problem. So that's one problem. But then we now hear him utter all of these antiquated ideas that America now has to reckon with. Oh man, these awful ideas, we've really thought that they weren't awful for a really, really long time. What does that say about our society? What does that say about our capacity to like make positive change? How do we go about solving these things that we didn't really think we needed to solve, or we thought we would just organically solve? Barack Obama was like the indicator that we're about to solve all these problems, and then we'll just keep on progressing. That clearly didn't happen. And so with Trump, it's two pronged. And so there's the trivial, frivolous lies that he says, that he utters to kind of like defend himself, or to project himself as a person that is the best. There are those ones, and those are just like petty and sad and kind of pathetic that we just have to see them all the time. And then there are the bigger, like culturally sweeping lies that we now recognize are lies. And so the oral storytelling that America has said for a very long time, like tragically has been disproportionately in favor of the narrative that the South has projected. Like the benevolence of all of our, these founding fathers who were slave owners, like Thomas Jefferson and George Washington. We've had this idea that George Washington never told a lie. Like that's what everyone was said. Black people were taught that, and we didn't have any problem with that. Not we as in like black people, but like America as a society just was like, yeah, of course. And so he is, when he's not lying to protect himself, he's telling like entrenched, normalized, expected, foundational American lies that we are now realizing, not we as in black people, but like America as a whole are realizing are these really, really big, problematic lies. And so, like, and this will be a word that I'll put in a future newsletter, but it's a phrase. It's this French phrase called bad faith, and it's all existentialism. So this kind of goes back to Bayanihan, where like existentialism is really important. But like in existentialism, there's this phrase bad faith, and we talk about bad faith in the common modern day as if I'm talking to someone and they say something and they're lying to me, and they have bad faith because they're interacting with me in bad faith. I can't trust them. They're gonna say something and do something else. That's bad faith. And you try to have good faith relationships with people so that if I say I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do it. Likewise for the other person. And if I don't do it, it's because I made a mistake. I'll own up to it, and I'll work to be better the next time. That's a good faith relationship. In existentialism, there's another type of bad faith, and that is when you lie to yourself. Because if you lie to yourself, now you just are waking up and living a lie. And no matter what your actions are or your intent, you are going to be a manifestation of that lie. And that's a big problem. A really casual idea, and America does it all the time, is they tell people to define themselves based on their profession. We're like, you are your job. Like, we all know that we aren't our job. Our job knows that we aren't it. But we tell people to define their self-worth and who they are based on their job. It's a lie. If you believe that, you'll go and live out your days and interact with people as if you are like this company, or if you don't have this check from this entity, you aren't going to be yourself anymore. And then if you get fired, you just won't know how to even live as yourself. That's crazy. Like, you clearly are a person who has decided to like interact with this corporation for a particular reason. It could be a reason as simple as, I just want to make this amount of money, and that's it. But so long as you don't define yourself as your job, you're not living in bad faith. But anyways, America as a society has had both iterations of bad faith all the time. And Trump is just a bad faith individual. And so it's detrimental on so many levels. And the fact that he lies all the time means that it's even easier for people to recognize all the other lies because they're being defended by someone who is just an unabashed liar. and so we don't have storytellers. The people that are our storytellers are just like propagandists. And the emergence of storytellers from communities of color are actually radically changing the narrative of American society, and that's quite significant. And so I hope that answered your question, Jackie. Again, I'm giving very long answers to these questions, which is fine. I just wow, I've answered 2 questions, and I think we've been going at this for over 30 minutes. Good question. Do I currently have any oral traditions you use with family and friends? Whew. So, that's a good question. So, I guess the answer is, yes and no. I think, I wish I would have more. So, I have stories that I tell of people that are alive, I guess. My grandma's in her 90s, and I tell stories about my grandma all the time. My grandma tells us, she's my grandma, so a lot of the stories she tells me are about things that I did as a kid that I don't even remember. I was a kid, I don't remember any of that stuff, but apparently they're really impactful to her. So now those stories live in my brain. They're in my brain, and I remember them. But I don't remember them. I remember her telling me them, but I can easily imagine me in that situation doing stuff. And so the oral traditions that I have are amongst living people. I think one of the big things for African Americans, we talk about generational trauma a lot in the Black community, and I think a good chunk of that trauma also means that African Americans are less inclined to talk about our lived experiences outside of good stories. But we live in a society where we need to know the bad stories. Like we just have to know them so that we can have a good understanding of where we live. And so but we don't, because those stories aren't fun. And so like as a result, you know, you can like be a 20-something African American kid and see something like George Floyd and go like, I can't believe that happens. And it's like, how can you not believe that happens? Like, this has been happening forever. Why isn't there a different emotional response? And a lot of that is because like our families don't talk about these types of things as much because they're just not pleasant. And so generationally, we don't talk about these stories that much. But I will say at a personal level, so this is funny because I'm actually like in my book that I'm working on right now, I just wrote this stuff out in one of my chapters. So this word is bringing up stuff I've just literally got done writing like an hour ago. So like, I remember when I graduated from Northwestern University, I didn't know what I wanted to do. Like I knew I wanted to do journalism, but I wasn't sure like where I wanted to do it or any of that kind of stuff. And luckily I still had like money in my bank account and a place to live in Chicago that gave me time to figure it out. And so I'm just like, and also like all of my friends had graduated. Everyone I knew in this city was gone. And normally that would make people sad, and I missed my friends. But I really liked just being completely by myself, having no school to go to, no parents to chat with or what. Like I was just all by myself. It was really cool. And it hit me that like I didn't feel like I knew where I wanted to go because I didn't know where a lot of my ancestors had gone. You know, like if you're basing what you want to do in your life off of, you know, what your parents have done, like that's not a big enough sample size of people, or or whether you do or don't like the town you grew up in. Like you need to have like a broader spectrum of examples of what you can or can't accomplish. And so I just had the impulse to like start digging into my family history. And luckily for me, I had an uncle that had that impulse like a decade before me and just had done a comprehensive search of everything. And so this guy, my Uncle Artie, had found black people that were our ancestors in like the 1700s. Like you don't find it's hard to find documented black people in America prior to emancipation, because like you only existed as a black person in America on paper when when a white person sold you to another white person. Apart from that, you were just like a last nameless person that lived on a plantation and just worked there for your entire life, just like the most inhumane stuff ever. But we fortunately we came from like a long line of people that were free persons of color in Charleston. And so these stories of like our family that has been in America since the 1700s and have had a whole array of professions and obstacles and all sorts of stuff, these stories are now part of our story. But that's only really something, and like I think I was one of the first people that started poking my uncle about it. And now over the last decade or so, he really has been sharing it with all of our family, and we get like emails and updates about all sorts of stuff that he finds and whatnot. And so I think, and it's African Americans are really big on Ancestry.com and finding family history and building the trees. And so we definitely have these stories, but it's more of like a modern day type thing. The stories that we've been orally telling for the most part throughout my life, those are stories that we have from people that are alive. Like my grandma's stories that she talks about, stuff that I did as a kid or my sister did as a kid, or what my parents were like as kids and stuff like that. We have those types of ones, but there aren't the legends and the mythologies and all that kind of stuff, the comprehensive Mololelo type stories where you sit down and talk to people about it. But I think now with the ancestry research and knowledge we have, we are in a good spot where we're able to start telling those mythologies, those legends. And so yeah. So we have them. Tragically, ethnocide means we don't have them as much as we should. But there's a concerted effort to bring them back. Another good question. That one, I think I was a little more concise on that one. But yeah, hope I answered that question, Jackie. Now, overall, the key thing for oral storytelling, it's a complicated thing, but it really makes you think about the importance of speaking truth and keeping truth within you, because you have the obligation to not corrupt a story and pass it on for generation to generation. And that can mean, like, we have more technology than people did back then. Like, if there wasn't paper to write stuff down, people's memories can be really good. Like, I remember before I had a cell phone, and all of my friends' phone numbers, I had those memorized. Really easy. Now, I don't remember any of my friends' phone numbers. Not a soul. Gotta look them up on my phone. But I say this because, back in the day before there was paper and the way to, like, document all this stuff and write it all down, people just had to really memorize and remember all of this all the time. Nowadays, we can write it down, we can keep it, but, like, writing it on paper and keeping that truth and, like, owning it and sustaining it, that also extends to, orally telling it and passing it on, because a key thing about these stories is that the purpose was to sustain these communities. Like, you tell these myths, and like the Brothers Grimm stories in Germany, like, those are stories that parents would tell kids to help show boys and girls how to grow from a child to a teenager to an adult. Like actually, here's a neat example. This is some trivia about Brothers Grimm. They use 3 colors a lot in these stories. They use red, white, and black. And so, like, for girls start out white. They start out like, this is just how the stories, these myths go. Girls start out white. They start out all, like, sweet and nice and pure and innocent or whatever, and then they turn red. That's what happens. Symbolism is clearly, menstruation. That's what happens. And then they become red, and then they go to black. And black is what you do when, like, you're coupled, like, you are no longer like you can be married. Boys, however, start out as red, and then they go white, and then they become black. And how they try to teach these stories is basically like, when you're a boy and you start out and you're all red and rambunctious and running around and smashing stuff, you need to be paired, or you need to be, like, not separated, but, like, distanced from, like, maternal comfort, and go and live with a wild man who can show you how to, like, have all of this stuff that can smash things, and just not go around smashing stuff, where you can be, like, a cool, calm guy, and then as an adult you can be chill and then smash things when you need to smash things. And once you have that, then you can, like, be married. And as for women, same thing. You start out, like, all pure. Then you have the red, the capacity to, like, smash and rage and, not be like, nice. And you need to get nurtured with another woman, and also you can become friends with guys that can show you how to, like, have that balance. And then once you have that balance, then you can go to black. They told these mythology stories to nurture people, to help their society survive. You had to keep this truth because it was dependent. Your survival was dependent on sustaining that. That's really heavy, and that's really important. And I think it shows the meaning of stories and the meaning of the stories that you tell, where they're not just for, like, entertainment or fun. You can have that, true, but the wisdom and philosophy of a lot of these cultures with oral traditions comes from people taking on and embodying, like, truth and wisdom throughout their life. And that's a really important thing to think about. And it's not something that is determined by, like, what the market says or how much money you have or any of that kind of stuff. And that's just a really important So I think with that, if we don't have any more questions, I think this is a pretty good one. Mololilo. It's a fun word. It just kind of like, I don't know, just seems fun to say. But with that, thanks Jackie and Luna, and Cassandra and everyone for showing up. Really enjoyed it, and have a good